Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Pillars of Success with Dr. Paul White. How are you doing today, Dr. White?
I am doing great.
Today, we are going to focus on the idea of self-love and being kind to yourself, because obviously within our journey, there are many times where we doubt ourselves, where it's easy to not be kind to ourselves. So today we're going to do an overview of the importance of being kind to yourself on your journey. So let's get started.
Great.
First and foremost, what is being kind to yourself? Give me an overall overview of what you consider that to be.
Well, someone told me once that imagine you have a best friend, and that best friend, is someone that you're very close to. How would you treat that person? What kinds of things would you tell that person? When you're in the company of that person, how would you feel? And I think these are things that we have to keep in mind when we think about ourselves and having a relationship for ourselves, with ourselves, and having love for ourselves. We should be our own best friends. And I know that's kind of a weird concept and it seems very, very abstract in many ways, but it absolutely lies at the core of our success. The more that we love ourselves, the more that we care about ourselves, the kinder we are to ourselves. First and foremost, we're going to be kind and more, friendly and more benevolent to others. But we're also going to be far happier and experience more personal success.
Now, some people don't entirely understand the meaning of self-love, and they may confuse it for having a large ego, or what some may say is arrogance. So what is kind of the difference between the two, and how can someone make sure that they're actually focusing on a healthy self-love versus having an inflated ego?
Yeah, so I think the difference between arrogance and genuine self-love is one of, how does it make us feel? I feel that when we are genuine and authentic with ourselves and we are truly kind and loving to ourselves, we're going to be this way to other people as well. And we're not going to want to put ourselves up and put other people down, which arrogance does that. Arrogance and being egocentric has this tendency to try to elevate us above others and push others down. And so I think that's how you differentiate that right from the get-go. And again, people that are genuinely loving and kind to themselves are going to be more at peace, and they're going to be happier and easier people to be around. I think people that are arrogant and egocentric, these are individuals that are much more difficult to be around. They're not necessarily the most happy individuals either. And I would say something interesting. Typically people that are more arrogant aren't necessarily very kind to themselves. They may walk around with an inflated self-ego, but they aren't generally very kind to themselves. They're hard on themselves as they're hard on others.
Now, in terms of kind of finding this self-love within ourselves, where does one start? I mean, it's such a large subject and a topic. How does one begin to venture into that idea and really start to love themselves?
I think you start with the easiest parts first. I think everybody can start with parts of themselves that are easy to love. We all have these great, parts of our personality, our persona that people love to be around. We love to be around. We enjoy. I think those areas we need to bask in and reflect upon as much as possible, and understand that those parts of us are like sunshine. And so I think we focus on those parts first to love. And then as time goes on, as we mature with that, we then start focusing on the areas that are difficult to love, the parts that we may not always like, forget about loving, but even liking, So I think that the end goal is to love every part of ourselves, love everything about us, and to accept every part of us. And what's interesting is the more that we do that with ourselves, the more that we love and accept ourselves, the more that we love and accept other people. the kinder we are to ourselves, the kinder we are to other people. And a lot of times that doesn't seem like it would make sense, right? It seems like, that's not really something that would be connected, but it is. It's very intrinsically connected. The way we treat ourselves absolutely is, in at least a broad spectrum, the way that we treat others, individuals.
In terms of kind of a daily ritual within self-love, obviously it's good to have a routine within everything you do. How would you go about that?
I feel that we need to focus on parts of our lives and aspects of our personality. And this is something that can be done through meditation. It can be done through prayer. I like to do it in my affirmations. So as I'm doing my affirmations, I like to remind myself to be kind to myself. I like to remind myself of my qualities, the great qualities that I have, and reflect. So a lot of what we do, in terms of growth and success, has to do with reflection. So, and again, being kind and loving yourself is no different. I think also too, when we make mistakes, to remind ourselves to be kind to ourselves, not to beat ourselves up, not to be upset, but to understand that we're human, that we make mistakes, and to really, again, if one of our best friends made a mistake, we would be kind to them. We would show them compassion. We need to show ourselves compassion. We need to show ourselves that same kind of love that we would show our best friend. So I think that's something that we keep in mind, something that we should practice every day, and it should be really on the forefront of our minds.
Now, do you think there is such thing as too much self-love and using that kind of as a route to avoid accountability?
I feel that self-love, genuine, authentic self-love, you can never have too much of it. Just like you can't ever have too much love and compassion towards others. If it's authentic, if it's the real thing. Of course, if you're confusing with arrogance or something that's definitively not self-love, then of course, you can move into areas of, where you're basically being maybe self-centered or egocentric, having that inflated sense of self and the arrogance. Of course, we never want to move into that territory. And if we do make mistakes, I think that we can make we can differentiate between making the mistake and not necessarily being happy with making that mistake, but also being kind to ourselves. So, learning from the mistake, learning, that's maybe something we don't want to continue doing or something we don't like to do, but also not being hard on ourselves. I think when we're hard on ourselves, it becomes much more difficult to affect change. If we want to affect change in our own lives, it's so important to have that kindness, love, and compassion. Again, when you're hard on yourself, many times you shut that off. You make it difficult to make those changes. You're not accepting of yourself. But I think when you're open, accepting, and loving of yourself, then it becomes much easier to make those modifications and changes in our lives.
In terms of self-love and a timeline, is this something that you can do relatively quickly with the right effort, or is this something that takes a long period of time? What if somebody knows it requires a lot of effort and that's part of the reason they struggle with it because they don't have that amount of effort to put into it?
It's both. You can see some short-term benefits almost immediately, but the real benefits are going to manifest themselves much longer in a much longer time scale. I think that it's important to know that any time that we undertake a journey of self-discovery, a journey of self-growth, it's going to require patience, time, sacrifice, but it's going to be painful. It's not going to be comfortable. This process isn't meant to be comfortable, and this process is meant to essentially take a lifetime. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to put that much work into it. That seems like more effort than they're willing to put into it. So I feel that if you're going to undertake this, if you really want to become a better version of yourself, and learn to love yourself and have that compassion, you're going to have to be patient. It's going to take time. But know that the hard work, effort, and being uncomfortable at times will have a big payoff in the end. That your life will continue to improve. It will continue to get better. You'll feel more peace. You'll have better relationships, not just with your family members and friends, but most importantly, you'll have the best relationship with yourself.
Now, when somebody lacks self-love, do you think it is correlated in any way with them being negative or mean towards others, or do you think those don't necessarily play into each other?
Some of the meanest, most miserable people you'll ever meet are individuals that are very mean or not very nice to others, in my opinion. So I think there is a absolute correlation. I can tell you personally in my own life, when I've been hard on myself, when I've been restrictive or overbearing on myself, I have a tendency to be that way towards others. I don't have as much patience. I don't have as much compassion. And I lack that empathy for them. When I really focus on having empathy for myself, love for myself, and that compassion, it spills over into other people. And so much like gratitude, self-love is something that can be practiced every day. It's something you can start out with very, very small and continue to add upon, and it grows over time. And so you'll actually, in a weird way, really start to fall in love with yourself. And that, again, might sound a bit strange and abstract, but it's absolutely important to have that deep-seated love for yourself if you want to have long-term success in lots of different areas in your life.
Was there ever a time in your life where you really struggled with being kind to yourself and it ended up making your life a lot harder, or it ended up being bad for your mental health?
Yes, definitely. I think if most people are honest, we probably have all had times in our lives where we've been hard on ourselves or we've had a very, very difficult time. It was actually in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was doing a lot of physical activity. I was doing a lot of long distance running. I was training really, really hard. I wasn't being very nice to my body. I was training, I would say overtraining. And I was almost too regimented. I was too hyper focused. I was essentially out of balance, and we've talked about this in other podcasts. When you're out of balance, it causes other problems in other areas of your life. But when I reflect back on that time, I wasn't being very kind to myself, and I wasn't being very kind to the people around me. I was actually more difficult to be around, and it was when I stepped back and when I realized, hey, I need to be kind to myself here. It's one thing to work out, but not to overdo it. It's one thing to be strict and disciplined and regimented without going overboard. And once I started giving myself that grace, once I started pulling back a bit and becoming more in balance, the easier I was to be around, and the kinder and more compassion I had for myself. I definitely was demonstrating that and showing that to others as well.
When did you really start to notice the shift in your life when you really felt like you'd reached a level of self-love that felt adequate, or at least enough to help you on a daily basis in order to achieve your goals?
I would say probably about 6 years ago or so. I really started trying to focus on that daily reflection. I really started to focus on many of the elements of self-improvement. And when you're talking about self-improvement, love of oneself is front and center, And so I think that that's when I really started trying to focus and put more energy into it. I also was looking at the time at some habits I had that I felt were maybe a bit self-destructive or self-sabotaging. And I realized that continuing with some of those habits, I was not being kind to myself. I wasn't being loving to myself. Those two don't match. You can't self-sabotage or be hurting yourself in some way and loving yourself. Though those two don't go together. So a person that truly loves themselves and has compassion for themselves, they're not going to do self-destructive things. They're not going to self-sabotage their lives.
On that note, do you think it is easy to confuse self-destruction for self-love?
I think sometimes at the very beginning parts of that journey, those two can interestingly be misconstrued. I think that, again, when we go back and talk about the idea of balance, we talk about the idea of not pushing too hard in one area or another and trying to strike balance in our lives. When in that pursuit, then we're not going to necessarily go overboard in one area or another. And it's easy sometimes, especially when something's new and sexy and exciting, to put all of our eggs in that basket. And so I would say the same thing. Sometimes in the pursuit of self-love, we may be over zealous in our approach. Again, we want to strike balance. That's true success in life. If you want success in lots of different areas in life, you have to have that balance. And so even balancing the amount of attention and time you spend in devotion to self-love and to having compassion towards oneself. So I think that if you were to focus too much energy on that, if you basically were to start neglecting other areas of your life, of course, it could be something that could be misconstrued and it could become destructive. So I think, again, focusing on just the right amount, doing, whether those be daily, meditations or something along those lines, but doing that in small doses and working on it, progressively, I think is probably the very best approach.
Would you say that we're our own worst enemy?
Oh, all humans are. We're our own greatest critics, and many times we can be our own worst enemies. So there is definitely a nihilistic aspect to our personas, inherently a nihilistic and apathetic portion of us, and so I feel that, and then of course a very self-destructive part of ourselves, and so I feel that this goes back to what I was saying about loving every part of ourselves. So there are parts of ourselves that are more difficult to love. I mean, let's just be honest. There are parts of ourselves that we have difficulty even liking, and many times, we see these these tendencies or these traits in other people, and this is why we sometimes don't like other people, because maybe they embody a trait that we see in ourselves. But I think that when we pursue those portions of ourselves, with compassion, with love, with understanding, then, we're going to have a much better outlook on everything that we do in life, and that we're going to give ourselves more grace. And it's going to have a much more positive net effect on our overall interactions, within the wider community, with our friends or family, and most importantly, ourselves.
Would you say there is any benefit to having a certain level of nihilism, or does it have no benefit whatsoever?
I have heard some people say that having, certain amounts of nihilism or apathy within the way we think is normal. Maybe a certain level of it is appropriate. I think that, of course, it is human nature, like I said. And I'm not a person that feels that we should run around and look at everything at the with rose-tinted glasses either. I think that we need to be pragmatic and have a certain sense of realism, but we need to be careful how we balance that out. I think that some individuals will have a tendency to be more pessimistic. I believe the best approach is optimism. I believe that someone that truly loves themselves and has compassion for themselves is at large probably an optimistic person. Whereas a person that's probably a little more miserable, a little more difficult to be around, is going to be a person that's more of a pessimist. So Is it normal to have some of those, to have a little bit of nihilism and maybe apathy and some pessimism and things like that? Yeah, I think human nature would dictate that we're going to have those thoughts from time to time. Do we need to look at the world at the other extreme with rose-tinted glasses and there's nothing happen, nothing wrong happens and everything's fine and we're just like la 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 la? No, I think that's also not an effective approach. I do feel that if we can approach it with optimism, but a certain element of realism, balancing those two out, that's going to be the very, very best approach. And that's truly an approach that would demonstrate our ability to love ourselves.
All right, we are going to go ahead now and wrap things up. But as always, before we wrap things up, if you guys liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And my very last question for you, Dr. White, is if you had to help somebody right now who is very, very hard time, if they had a very hard time, struggling with self-love, how would you go about it? How would you interact with them? How would you help them from square one to get them on track to improving their life?
I would have them start small. Like most things in life, I would have them start doing something every day, whether that be meditation or a daily affirmation, reaffirming their value to themselves. Thinking about all the amazing things that they do, all the amazing traits and talents and qualities that they have, and reflect upon those things. Again, love and compassion towards oneself, much like gratitude, is a daily exercise. These are things that, when practiced, and especially practiced over a long period of time, we get better at them. We feel better about ourselves. We become more productive, easier individuals to be around. And I feel that, if that would be the advice I would give. I would say start out small. Find areas about yourself that are easy to love, that are easy to have compassion for, and then build upon that. And remember that we all make mistakes. We all basically deserve grace. We all deserve compassion. We all deserve to love ourselves unconditionally. And that really, at the end of the day, defines everything else that we do when it comes to the pillars of success.
Thank you very much for your time, and everybody make sure to like and subscribe once again, and have a nice day. We will see you in the next one.
Take care.